Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Donald Trump blasts Vladimir Putin after Russia unleashes its biggest air assault of the war, firing 367 drones and missiles on Ukrainian cities, leaving at least 12 people dead. Speaking from New Jersey, Trump says, "I'm not happy with Putin. He's killing a lot of people." Palestinian rescuers say an Israeli airstrike hit a school in Gaza City at dawn today, killing 13 and wounding 21 others. This comes just hours after at least 22 were reported dead in widespread strikes across the Strip yesterday. Donald Trump agrees to push back a massive tariff hike on EU goods to July the 9th after a good call with European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen. Trump warns he's still ready to impose 50% tariffs if a deal isn't reached. Leaders from across Southeast Asia gather in Kuala Lumpur for the 46th ASEAN Summit to tackle trade tensions, the Myanmar crisis and South China Sea disputes. Malaysia hosts amid tight security and back-to-back talks with the GCC and China. Donald Trump says talks with Iran over the weekend were very good and could bring good news on stopping Tehran's nuclear program. The discussions in Rome mark a rare moment of progress between the two sides. With the South Korean election just around the corner, Liberal candidate Jae Ling-myung vows to restore military hotlines with North Korea and repair strained ties with China if elected. He calls Seoul-Beijing relations the worst in years and promises stability. With the South Korean election approaching, Liberal candidate Jae Ling-myung vows to restore military hotlines with North Korea and repair strained ties with China if elected. He calls Seoul-Beijing relations the worst in years and promises stability. French President Emmanuel Macron meets Vietnamese leaders in Hanoi today, aiming to sign dozens of deals and strengthen France's influence amid US trade pressure. The visit includes talks on Airbus, satellites and energy in Macron's first trip to the former colony. Our top story today, 13 people were killed as Russia launched a record number of drones against Ukraine overnight, according to officials. The attacks came as the two countries completed their biggest prisoner swap since Moscow launched its full-scale invasion in February of 2022, with 1,000 captured soldiers and civilian prisoners sent back by each side. Ukraine's emergency services have described an atmosphere of terror amid a second straight night of massive Russian airstrikes. Those killed in the latest Russian strikes also included children in the northwestern region of Zhytomyr, as per officials. This comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on social media for truly strong pressure on Russia. The European Union's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, has also called for the strongest international pressure on Russia to stop this war. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul backed this statement and approved further sanctions at a European level. In a related development, US President Donald Trump has called Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin crazy for his attacks on Ukrainian cities and warned that any attempt at a total takeover of Ukraine would lead to the downfall of Russia. Trump's comments come after a record number of Russian drones killed at least 13 people across Ukraine, despite a prisoner exchange and a US push for a truce. Trump has also criticized Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and accused him of doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. This comes after Trump told reporters that he was not happy with Putin over the latest Russian offensive. Meanwhile, European allies and even some in his own Republican Party have called for increased pressure on Russia to agree to a ceasefire. The US president has reportedly avoided issuing ultimatums to Russia, instead threatening to walk away from negotiations if both sides cannot agree to a ceasefire. However, on Sunday, Trump said he was absolutely considering increasing US sanctions on Russia in response to the latest violence. We are now joined by Dr. Pansara Amar Singh from Koltawala Defence University, Colombo, Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Dr. Amar Singh, for joining us on the programme. This comes amid diplomacy and violence that continues to happen, but there seems to be limited movement, Amar Singh. How do you make of the current developments in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the US stance? Can I get your current views on the current developments?
I think by all means, the current development seems to be quite ironic. As you precisely pointed out, here we come across a situation wherein the violence and the diplomacy move hand in hand. So we had the biggest prisoner swap after 2022, Russia's full-scale invasion last week. In this prisoner swap, I think more than 320 prisoners are being exchanged, and there is a huge discussion going on regarding the situation of the Ukrainian prisoners under the Russian detention. There have been several criticisms about the way how they were treated under the Russian detention, saying that the way they were treated were completely a blatant violation of the international humanitarian law standard. But having said that, if I look at the large-scale intensifying Russian offensive on Sunday by using 298 drones to attack several cities in Ukraine, which gives a clear indication that Russian strategy seems to be quite intensified amidst the diplomacy, amidst the intervention coming from President Trump. Because Putin clearly knows that the Russians have Russia can somehow deal with the United States given the closer rapport existing between President Putin and Donald Trump. So Russia doesn't care anything about the opposition, the pressure coming from Europe, because Putin clearly sees Europe as a debilitated, quite a weaker force. So that is why Russia takes stances in intensifying the drone attacks, attacking the several Ukrainian cities. And also we should not forget the fact that at the moment Russian offensive, the land operation has been completely weakened because their level of moving ahead has been slowed down by the formidable Ukrainian defensive. So at the moment, Russia clearly knows if they intensify the drone attacks over the Ukrainian cities only, they can at least convince the Russian public that the victory would be a certain thing. So this is my take about the current development about the Russian offensive since last evening.
Dr. Amar Singh, when it comes to Russia, Donald Trump seems to be all bark and no bite in regards to Vladimir Putin keeps stepping up these attacks. We've seen him kill 13 yesterday. There was that attack in Sumy a couple of weeks back, which killed 34. When Donald Trump had his argument with Zelensky in the White House, he paused military aid, he paused military intelligence sharing. What is your take on the two different outlooks that Donald Trump has on both Russia and with Ukraine?
Trump has a cynical attitude towards Ukraine from the very beginning. If you have noted the way how he negotiated with Zelensky when Zelensky was invited to White House, it was quite offensive. And the Ukrainian expectations which they were having under Biden seems to have been completely shattered since the day Trump stepped into the Oval Office. Because for Trump, this war is an additional burden for the American economy. Trump is a nationalist by all means, and he doesn't want to involve in someone else's war. So at the same time, we must understand that the Trump expects Putin would somehow abide by the discussion that they were having on Monday. There was a telephone conversation between the leaders from Russia and the United States on Monday, but within few days after that, Putin completely stunned the West by launching this offensive. So that led Trump to call him describe as a completely crazy person. But again, if you look at the whole scenario from a vantage point of view, we need to understand that under President Trump, Ukrainians are not going to get any additional favor from Washington. So they need to completely rely on Europe. So as long as they rely on Europe, they can be saved. But at the same time, we must not forget the fact that at the moment, the Russian offensive is planning to establish a buffer zone within Ukraine. So this is what actually indicated by Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairperson to the Russian Security Council. He clearly stated that as long as Europe continues to support Ukraine, they somehow need to make a buffer zone geographically encompassing the Ukrainian territory to uphold the protection for the Russian Federation.
Dr. Amar Singh, obviously no one can really read Donald Trump's mind or what he's going to do next. But in reference to this, he says, what the hell happened to him in reference to Putin's actions. What do you think he's thinking about here? I mean, we've seen repeated Russian strikes on Ukraine, killing civilians on multiple occasions. I spoke about that Sumy strike, where it killed 34 civilians recently. How unusual is this language in the context of US and Russia relations?
Well, this is a typical macho type behavior coming from Donald Trump. I mean, we are completely accustomed to the statement coming from the American president for past few months since he stepped into the White House. And here comes a man who promised to end the war in 24 hours, but it's been nearly 6 months, right? Still, the war is going on. And in my point of view, I think, as you clearly pointed out, no one can predict what Donald Trump thinks. But Trump thinks and Trump calculates he can make a deal with Putin. But at the same time, if Trump thinks in that manner, he's going to make another detrimental mistake as President George W. Bush made in 2000. You know, when Bush met Putin for the first time, he simply said, I looked at him in the eye and I recognized him to be a very honest man. So that's how Putin took the West for a ride. If President Trump thinks that he can somehow make a deal with Putin by manipulating him, by using all kind of informal negotiation with the Russian leader, which is going to be a fatal mistake.
Dr. Pansara Amar Singh, thank you very much for your insight on the programme. We now move over to the Middle East, where in the latest turn of events in the Israel-Gaza conflict, Palestinian rescue teams reported that an Israeli airstrike early this morning killed at least 13 people at a school in Gaza City as Israel continues its campaign against Hamas. Gaza's civil defense body said 13 people were retrieved and 21 others were injured from the Fahmi al-Jawaraji school in Al-Daraj neighborhood after it was targeted at dawn. Meanwhile, at least 22 people were killed and dozens more were wounded in yesterday's Israeli airstrikes across the Gaza Strip. The international community of the Red Cross also confirmed the deaths of the two of its staff members, Ibrahim Eid and Ahmed Al-Hilal, in a strike on their home in Khan Yunis. Eid worked as a weapons contamination officer and Abu Hilal was a security guard at the ICRC field hospital in Rafah. Now let's hear from a close friend of the two ICRC staff members who were killed in the attack.
استهدافهم بشكل مباشر في وقت فراغهم القصير، هم كان عملهم 16 ساعة في ال 24 ساعة كل يوم. جهدهم كان لا يتوانى عن خدمة الناس، وكانوا معرفين لدى الكل انهم صليب احمر. واحد سكيورتي صليب امن صليب، واحد منسق العلاقات العامة لدى الصليب. كان يتعامل طول عمره ابراهيم عيد يروح ويجي مع الوفود، واحمد كان طول عمره يحميهم. شغال امن للصليب، يعني ما بشكلوا اي خطر على الاحتلال، تم استهدافهم بشكل.
Now, in the latest diplomatic developments surrounding the Israel-Gaza conflict, U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem visited the Western Wall in Jerusalem shortly after her arrival in Israel, where she was greeted by the U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee. Meanwhile, the head of a U.S.-backed group, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, unexpectedly resigned, adding uncertainty to the future of their aid efforts. Executive Director Jake Wood explained that he could no longer stay as the foundation failed to operate in line with humanitarian principles. On another front, lawmakers from Europe and Arab nations met in Madrid on Sunday to discuss the ongoing war in Gaza. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa addressed the gathering, calling for more US involvement. Let's hear his statement.
Well, obviously, the United States is a very important stakeholder in the Middle East region. We would like to see them engaged as much as possible. Their efforts in terms of Gaza ceasefire is appreciated, but we also want to see them hopefully in New York for the International Peace Conference. So hopefully more engagement, positive engagement by the U.S. will help bring peace and stability for the region. We want to see a ceasefire in Gaza. We want to see an end of occupation as soon as possible, and we want to hopefully move as fast as possible to peace where Palestine and Israel can coexist and hopefully bring stability and security.
Finally, Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdulati discussed the need for applying maximum pressure on Israel. Let's take a listen to his comments.
Unfortunately, there is a lack of political will from the Israeli side. This is the main problem, and we will keep trying. We will apply maximum pressure. We will continue to exert our maximum efforts in order to push for a ceasefire, because we managed to succeed on the 19th of January, and we reached the ceasefire, and it worked because we managed to release 21 hostages and at that time, and to allow the flow of humanitarian and medical aid into Gaza. But it was Israel who walked out of this agreement, and they continued their own attacks and aggressions on Gaza.
We now move to US-Europe relations, where President Donald Trump has agreed to delay a 50% tariff on EU imports until July the 9th. The decision comes after a call from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who asked for more time to reach a trade deal. The tariff threat, originally set for June the 1st, had shaken global markets and sparked fresh tensions between Washington and Brussels. Trump had earlier said he wasn't interested in a deal, insisting the 50% tariff would stand. But after Sunday's call, Trump backed off, saying he and von der Leyen had a very nice conversation and that talks would now move swiftly. The euro and US dollar rose against safe haven currencies like the yen and Swiss franc after the extension was announced. Trump's trade policies have long challenged allies, and while deals have been made with China and the UK, ties with the EU remain strained, with just weeks left to avoid a major escalation. We're now joined by Professor Madhav Nalapat, Editorial Director of the Sunday Guardian. Thank you very much, Professor Nalapat, for joining us on the programme. We're once again seeing a tit-tat decision-making from Donald Trump, one positive conversation with the European Commission chief, and he's changed his mind again. Can I get your thoughts, please?
Well, I'd like to say that Trump is flip-flopping all over the place, and unfortunately, he is destroying his goodwill in the United States, apart from other countries. There are a lot of internet messages around that Trump's close friends and relatives are basically playing the stock market, and he makes a statement, he makes some extreme demands and he suggests some extreme policies, then that has an effect on stock prices, and then he reverses course, and then the stock prices rebound. And I mean, I don't believe it is true. I don't think President Trump would indulge in that kind of corrupt activity. But the reality is that the widespread feeling that he and his friends are indulging in speculation on shares. Obviously, shares will come down when tensions go up. And when tensions come down, shares go back up. So they basically buy when shares are low, and then, they sell when shares are high. So they're manipulating the market. So this kind of thing is going on. This tariff war makes no sense because it doesn't differentiate a friend from a foe. The European Union has been a close ally of the United States for a long time. and that will continue. Now, of course, it's joined by new allies in the Indo-Pacific, in Asia, notably, for example, India. But I want to say that it is harming President Trump a lot, and he better be careful because 2026 midterms are not are just 2 years away, and if he loses badly in that, he becomes a lame duck for the remaining 2 years of his term, and he won't be able to implement any of the wonderful ideas. Some of them are not so good, many of them are excellent. Any of the wonderful ideas he's got. So I think he's playing a very dangerous game.
Professor Nalapat, this pause or delay has come after a singular conversation with EU Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen. That's affecting 27 countries in the European Union. Do you think Donald Trump's value of back-channel diplomacy is too much?
Look, I don't know about back channel or front channel or whatever, but the reality of the situation is that this kind of sudden raise in tariff is having a terrible impact on public opinion in these countries. India, the 76% of the population had a favorable view of President Trump. Today, that figure has gone down to very low and abysmal figures because the people in India are shocked at his gyrations, especially he's equating a terror state, which is what Pakistan has become, with India. That really shocked the people of India. How can you equate a state that has been sponsoring terrorism and breeding terrorist outfits, where designated terrorists are staying, and with the largest democracy in the world, which is a key country where the United States needs to work together, and fortunately is still working together. So I want to say very frankly, I think the world has had enough of these tantrums, and the American public have had enough of the effect of these tantrums. And if he does these tariffs, prices will shoot up in the United States, and there'll be the streets will be full of people protesting. So honestly, I think the real Donald Trump better stand up. I think the old Donald Trump, the real Donald Trump, needs to assert himself once more. And this Donald Trump, I mean, whimsical and frankly, doing all kinds of things, such as not differentiating friends from like the European Union or India from a foe, which is China. I want to say that this is very self-defeating, both for himself as well as his country, as well as for much of the rest of the world.
Professor Madhav Nalapat, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We now move over to Southeast Asia, where the biggest leaders are meeting in Malaysia, and trade tensions and expansion are all on the table. At the first ASEAN Summit since US President Donald Trump's tariff shocks, leaders are expected to issue a strong message of concern over unilateral US moves. Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim opened the summit by praising ASEAN's resilience despite growing global uncertainty. The bloc is looking to strengthen ties with China, the Gulf states and the European Union, part of what analysts call multi-alignment diplomacy. ASEAN won't retaliate against US tariffs but wants to keep talking. Malaysia has even requested a special ASEAN-US summit this year, but so far no reply from Washington. The summit is also focusing on the Myanmar crisis, calling on the junta to honour a peace deal they signed in 2021. And ASEAN may get bigger soon, with East Timor expected to join the bloc by October, after making strong progress towards membership. We stay in the diplomatic world. There may be a breakthrough ahead in the US-Iran talks, with President Trump saying this weekend negotiations with Iranian delegation were very good and showed serious progress. Trump spoke from New Jersey before flying back to Washington, hinting that he could have good news on the Iran front very soon. The talks took place in Rome, led by US envoy Steve Witkoff and Iranian officials. It was the fifth round of negotiations aimed at curbing Tehran's nuclear program. Despite public tough talk on both sides. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said there's room for progress, especially after Oman presented new proposals during the meetings. No final deal yet. However, the door to further talks could be open very soon, according to Trump.
Very importantly, we had some very good talks with Iran yesterday and today, and let's see what happens. But I think we could have some good news on the Iran front. Likewise with Hamas on Gaza. We want to see if we can stop that. And Israel, we've been talking to them, and we want to see if we can stop that whole situation as quickly as possible. But having to do with nuclear, we've had some very, very good talks with Iran, and I don't know if I'll be telling you anything good or bad over the next 2 days, but I have a feeling I might be telling you something good. We've had some real progress, serious progress.
We're happy with the talks with Iran. Will there be another round of talks soon?
Very soon. The Iran talks, I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. I can tell you the Iran talks have been going very well.
And you said you're unhappy.
And I'd love that to happen, because I'd love to see no bombs dropped and a lot of people dead. I really would like to see that happen.
Now let's turn back to Southeast Asia, where French President Emmanuel Macron is in Vietnam, kicking off a 6-day tour of Southeast Asia. He's pushing his Indo-Pacific strategy as a balanced path between US and Chinese influence. Macron arrived in Hanoi on Sunday night and began today with a visit to a war memorial honouring those who fought French colonial rule. He'll hold talks with President Nguyen Chiong and Vietnam's most powerful figure, Communist Party chief Tu Lam. Macron's focus, strengthening cooperation in energy, defence and transport, and offering a third way that respects trade rules without picking sides. Human Rights Watch urged Macron to address Vietnam's growing rights abuses, but he's known for raising sensitive issues privately. Vietnam, meanwhile, is walking a diplomatic tightrope, caught between US security pressures and strong economic ties to China, all while facing tariff threats from Washington. We move on once again. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has thanked Turkish President Erdogan for his resolute support during the recent military standoff with India. The two leaders met in Istanbul on Sunday. Sharif called Pakistan's response an overwhelming victory after 4 days of cross-border fire that killed over 70 people. Turkey urged both sides to avoid war, but openly backed Pakistan after India launched strikes following a deadly attack in Kashmir. Turkish and Pakistani officials, including their foreign and defence ministers, discussed deepening cooperation in energy, transport, defence and the fight against terrorism. Turkey maintains friendly ties with India, but Erdogan's support for Islamabad has sparked boycotts of Turkish products in some Indian cities. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.